Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to Just Law on IQRA TV. I'm your host Ilyas Bulbulia. This is the second part to the show. Just before the break, we had a number of calls which we were dealing with, and as I said before, if you have any questions on any aspect of English law, whether it's immigration matters, whether it relates to family law matters, etc., the number that you can call on is appearing at the bottom of the screen. Inshallah, if you give us a call on that, I should be able to give you some guidance in relation to your questions or queries. Just before the break, we were also looking at how somebody who's in the United Kingdom, how they can sponsor their husband or wife to come to the United Kingdom. In a previous show, we've looked at a number of requirements, and today what we were doing was looking at the financial requirement, and in particular where somebody has to meet the 18,600 requirement. How is that requirement met? And I was explaining just before the break that it really does depend on the person's circumstances. So on the one hand, you could have somebody who is here in the UK, and the person could be on, for example, could be employed, could be self-employed as a sole trader or a partner in a business, could be self-employed operating a limited company, could be receiving rental income, could be or could have a lot of savings, and they are relying on savings to meet the 18,600 requirement. So really, when you look at how the 18,600 requirement is going to be met, you do need to look at what the sponsor in the UK is doing. When the person in the UK is trying to sponsor a husband or wife to come from abroad to the United Kingdom. So what is it that the sponsor in the UK, the partner in the UK, what is it that person is doing? And it's really based on that you determine what kind of supporting documents do you need to submit, because each category is significantly different to the other. So that's what we were looking at just before the break, and I'll go into that in a bit more detail. But as always, if you have any questions on any aspect of law, whether it's immigration matters or anything else, the number that you can call on appears at the bottom of the screen. So let's look at the most common situation that you get, which is where you've got the husband or wife in the UK, the sponsor, who is employed. And in practice, I would say 70 to 80% of cases are where the sponsor in the UK is employed. So in a normal situation, what we are looking at is that the sponsor in the UK will need to submit 6 months of wage slips, 6 months of bank statements, and an employment letter to confirm their employment. That's what you normally submit. But you have to be careful, because even in a situation where somebody is employed, it could be that they've changed jobs recently. So it might be that they've only held this particular job for 3 months, and prior to that they were undertaking other employment which has now come to an end, and they've taken on this new job in its place. In that situation, you can't submit just 6 months of wage slips. You need to submit 12 months of wage slips. So even though you've got a common situation where somebody is employed and you submit 6 months wage slips to support the application, that may not necessarily apply to all cases where somebody is employed. Even within that category, you need to be careful. You need to look at how long the person has been employed for. It may well be that 6 months of wage slips is not sufficient, and you do need to submit 12 months of evidence. So what's happened recently is there are very detailed rules relating to this in terms of, even within employment, depending on the different types of employment, the different types of documents you need to submit. So let's assume for now that the person has been employed for 6 months in the same job, the sort of more straightforward applications that you get where the sponsor has been working for 6 months. So in that situation, the 18,600 requirement is met by submitting the last 6 months wage slips. But let's look at that in greater detail. Let's drill down and just look at what it is that you are submitting. So even where you submit wage slips for the last 6 months, even there you need to be careful. You need to look at whether somebody is on a fixed salary or whether they are receiving variable income, where they might be employed on an hourly basis, so month per month or week per week. The income varies depending on the hours that they've worked. So you need to be careful about how, even within the last 6 months, the income requirement is going to be met. For example, if somebody is on a fixed salary, the difficulty is that even if they've got quite a high salary, if in one of the months, in the previous 6 months, the salary drops because they've taken unpaid leave, etc., or they've fallen ill, that could cause a problem because with somebody who is in employment, working for 6 months, your wage slips are meant to be consistently at the level that you're relying on for the duration of the whole 6 months. So you need to be careful there. If, for example, somebody is an hourly paid employee, typically what you get in factories, their wages go up and down every month, then it's slightly easier because you can work out the total income received in the last 26 weeks. And as long as the total income received comes up to half of 18,600, which is 9,300, that's sufficient. So even with the wage slips, you need to be careful. You need to work out, is this fixed income? Is this variable income? And look at the different rules which govern that. Moving on to the actual wage slips, the requirement is that original wage slips should be submitted. If you're not able to submit original wage slips, what the rules require is that when the employer provides the employment letter confirming the employment, then in the employment letter, the employer will confirm that we don't issue original wage slips, or the employment letter confirms that the wage slips which have been attached to the letter, they might be printouts from emails, PDF printouts. So the letter confirms that they may not be original wage slips that we're used to getting. They may just be online wage slips, but the letter confirms that the wage slips are authentic and have been issued by the company. So that's the way you get round where you don't have original type wage slips. They're mainly printouts from the internet or from emails that have been received. So not only do you look at whether it's fixed income, variable income, you need to look at the actual wage slips and the format that the wage slips are in. You need to look at also that they do cover the last 6 months. So for example, if you apply on the 15th of January, you'll need your wage slips which are within the last 6 months. So they have to be recent. They can't be any older than approximately 17th or 18th of December, because otherwise the last wage slip has to be dated that. Otherwise they don't fall within the last 6 months. They may fall within the last 7 months, which is not what they want. They want the wage slips to be up to date. So the last wage slip has to be within the last 28 days. So typically, if you apply in January, you're going to have to put your December wage slip in. It's no good putting your wage slips in for 6 months, but only up until November when you're applying in January. There's too big a gap between the wage slips that you're submitting and the date on which you are applying. So those wage slips have to be up to date as well. That's one of the reasons why a lot of the applications get refused. Another reason why applications get refused is that the wage slip, which shows the gross pay, shows the deductions, and then shows what the net pay is, whether it's weekly pay or monthly pay, whatever it is, the deductions are made, and obviously one receives the net pay at the end of the week or end of the month. That amount of money has to go into the bank account exactly to the penny. So for example, if the wage slip is a monthly wage slip and it says £1,310.50, that's the amount of money that needs to go into the bank. Surprised the number of applications that you see where there's a discrepancy. There might have been a problem with payroll, there might have been a problem somewhere where there's a discrepancy between the wage slip net pay amount and the actual amount that's gone into the bank account. That's another common reason for the applications being refused. Another common reason why applications get refused is where somebody receives money in cash, which in itself isn't a problem. So if the person works weekly or monthly, gets paid weekly or monthly, they may receive their salary in cash. And typically we still see that in businesses which are still cash-based businesses. Somebody who works in a shop, where the shop normally takes obviously money in cash. Some smaller shops may take a lot of cash. So what the employer tends to do is pay employees in cash as opposed to banking all the money. That in itself isn't a problem. But what the rules do say is that, again, whatever the net pay is that's been paid to the employee in cash, that has to be deposited into the bank account exactly to the penny. It can't be rounded up, can't be rounded down. It has to be the same amount of money that's paid into the bank account. So, for example, if the amount received is £1,310.20, that's the amount that needs to be deposited into the bank account if the person is receiving cash salary. So that's another very common problem where somebody has been employed but they don't actually put the money into the bank account. So they get the money, they may, instead of putting the exact amount in, they might just simply, in the example that we've just spoken of before, they might just say, look, I need some money to live on, I'm going to use it for X, Y and Z. I'll then deposit £900 or £1,000. That's a common reason for the application to be refused. So even on the wage slips, you need to be careful when wage slips have been submitted to support a husband or wife's application to come to the UK. You need to be careful on that as well. Let's take our next call. Hello, assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. I just called a few minutes ago and you told me we have three things to do while applying for the second visa.
Sure.
Okay, which form are we supposed to use for that?
What's happened now is that the paper forms have been removed from the Home Office website, so you can't use paper forms anymore. But if you Google FLRM
M.
So what it stands for is further leave to remain based on marriage. So if you Google that, there is now an online form that needs to be completed.
Okay. So we can't get a paper form for that to just as we had done before and then...
No, the paper forms have been removed from the Home Office website. So you unless there's a form on somebody else's website, they've saved the PDF and they've put it on another website, it's unlikely. But the paper forms have been removed, and all we now have is the online forms.
Online forms.
Which is, to be quite, they're not difficult to use. It is quite easy, and you can save the form as you go along. Every time you want to go into it, you can click on the link, put the password in, log in, and carry on, make amendments, etc. So it's not too difficult, but it is now simply an online form that needs to be completed. Okay. No problem. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for calling. The Home Office is trying to move a lot of these things online now and become more digitalized, and one of the things that the Home Office has done is removed the paper forms. What they're now doing is there's an online form which is completed, similar kind of questions to what you used to have on the paper forms. Then when the forms are completed, what the Home Office are trying to do is to say to people the supporting documents should be scanned and uploaded. So ideally they want people to do that as well. So it's becoming quite, so trying to do away with paper forms, paper documents, etc. But obviously with the nature of the application, they're not going to be able to do away with paper based documents completely, but that seems to be the aim at the moment, and therefore you'll find when you go online, a lot of the old documents that you used to have online, they are no longer there, and it's the online form that needs to be completed. Just going back to what we were discussing before, which is how somebody in the United Kingdom who wants to sponsor their husband or wife to come to the UK, how they do that. We were looking at a financial requirement, in particular the 18,600 requirement is what we're looking at. How do you fulfill it? And what I was looking at today, and I'll look at the other examples later on in different shows, what we were looking at is the typical situation, the most common situation where somebody is employed and then relying on the last 6 months income. What do they need to submit? And we were looking at the fact that they need to submit 6 months wage slips. And what I was looking at just before we received the call was the common problems, the common mistakes, the common pitfalls even when you're looking at something as simple as looking at the last 6 months of wage slips. So where the common problems are. And we were looking at, typical problems of the wage slips may not be originals. You need to look at whether it's a fixed salary or variable income to make sure you do meet the requirements over the 6 months. You need to make sure the net pay has gone into your bank account. If you're receiving cash, you need to make sure that that cash payment is being deposited into your bank account at the right time and the right amount is being deposited. So we were looking at sort of the various different problems commonly that occur. And one of the points before I move on to the next bit that we were looking at was that you have to make sure that the documents are up to date, not more than the last document should not be more than 28 days old. So these are the common 4 or 5 problems that you come across regularly. Unfortunately, in my experience, where people have submitted applications themselves without obtaining advice, that's where they've made these small mistakes. And it's because of that small mistake that the application has been refused. The problem is when the application is refused, potentially the application fee is lost, and when the new application is made, you have to pay the fee again. So potentially the application fee, which is non-refundable, which is in the region of £1,500 to £1,600, is what is lost if there is an error in the application. So it is important that if you're not sure about how to do this, that you do take proper advice from somebody experienced in these matters. So that's the case with wage slips. One of the other mandatory requirements, in addition to 6 months wage slips, is the 6 months bank statements. Again, there are some common pitfalls there that I just want to run through before the end of the show. Ideally, what you do want to submit is original bank statements. If you don't submit original bank statements, if they are simply internet printouts, that could be a problem. So ideally, you want to submit original bank statements. If you have online printouts, etc., or the banks have simply printed your bank statements for you, you should ask the bank to stamp the bank statement. So original bank statements or stamped by the bank. If you don't do one of those, then there is a risk that the Home Office may not accept the bank statements which you are submitting. So that's the first thing, original bank statements or bank statements which are stamped by the bank. Common problem. Second common problem is that the bank statements may not cover the same period as the wage slip. So for example, if you're applying now, the period that you're looking at is wage slips for the period July, August, September, October, November, December. You need the bank statements which cover the whole of the same period. So from the 1st of July to the end of December, it's got to mirror the wage slip period. Third common problem, you have to make sure that the money that you're relying on in the wage slips, that money's gone into the bank account. So for example, if you're relying on a December wage slip, no point getting a bank statement which is not even for the whole of December or is up until the end of December, but doesn't show the December payment because that money's gone into the account in January. You need the January bank statement as well. So not only do you have to submit bank statements which cover the same period as the wage slips, the bank statements also need to show all the net pay, whether it's weekly or monthly net pay that you're relying on, that must be shown in the bank statements. That's again another common problem. Another common problem that you come across is sometimes there's a gap in the bank statements over the last 6 months. It may be that a sheet is missing and there's a gap for a week or 2 weeks. Again, that's not acceptable as far as the Home Office is concerned. That in itself could be a reason for refusal. So that's again something that you need to be careful about. So another common problem is that the bank statement must be in the sole name of the sponsor in the UK, or it could be in the joint names, but only in the joint names with the husband or wife who is applying to extend their visa or to call their husband or wife to the United Kingdom. So ideally, where the sponsor is in the UK sponsoring the husband or wife to come over, the bank statement should be just in that sponsor's name, not in the parent's name, not in the joint names with their parents. Shouldn't really have anybody else's money in that bank account. So even with a simple matter such as bank statements, there are a number of common pitfalls that you need to be careful about. Finally, before we come to the end of the show, the employment letter. Again, the employment letter should be original, should be dated no earlier than 28 days before the application. So no point applying now using a letter from November or October. It has to be a recent letter, end of December, or a January letter, and it should contain the information that the Home Office requires. And the information is confirmation that you're employed, what your job title is, when you started employment, what do you earn, how long have you been earning that money, is your job permanent, temporary, fixed term, what is it? So there are certain pieces of information that needs to go in the employment letter. There may be situations where it's difficult to get the employer to include all that information in there. The Home Office is generally flexible as long as your other documents are fine. If there's a little bit of information that is missing, the Home Office will normally be okay. But try and get an employment letter which is original, which is dated no earlier than 28 days before the date of the application, which has the mandatory information, confirms you're employed, confirms what your job title is, confirms when you started work, what your salary is, how long have you been receiving that salary, and what's the nature of your employment. Is it permanent? Is it temporary? Is it fixed term? And try and get that letter done with a letter which has the contact number of the person who is doing the letter. So if they want clarification, there's a number that they can call, the Home Office can call and can get clarification. So this show has really just concentrated on the most basic of spouse applications in terms of where the sponsor is employed, has been employed for 6 months, and the kind of documents that need to be submitted for that. 6 months wage slips, 6 months bank statements, and the employment letter. And that's the most easiest, the most basic type of application that lawyers, immigration lawyers, generally advise on. What we'll do in the coming weeks is look at the more complicated type of applications where somebody is self-employed, somebody is operating a limited company, somebody wants to rely on rental income, or somebody wants to rely on cash savings. They all are acceptable to the Home Office, but they all have their own set of specific rules which need to be fulfilled. So in the coming weeks, we'll look at that in greater detail. But that today, in a nutshell, deals with how the financial requirement is to be met. Unfortunately, that does then bring us to the end of the show. Inshallah, we should be back next week at 6 o'clock. Until then, Assalamu alaikum.